Omar Shaukat, and he is a researcher from the Afro Middle East Center. Omar, thanks for joining us. First of all, the French authorities believe that these attacks were planned abroad by the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant. When you look at what is happening now, do you see any evidence that links to that assertion?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. Now, as far as the question, generally the way these things operate, and I'm speaking from, studying some of these things from the past, not so much about this one because this is still, developing and we're getting the evidence in, that from the outside, so in this case we would say from Syria and Iraq, the central leadership of ISIS probably did not have a lot of, logistical fiction to give. Rather, it was more of a statement that we want ourselves or we want our operatives to carry out such an attack. And then the planning would be done locally. And that's, one other reason why we should not read too much into the fact that these attacks happened one day after the Lebanon attacks. Because that might just be purely coincidental, as it happened earlier in the year when Tunisia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, all these countries saw attacks happening very close to each other. Yes, I mean, it does happen that one attack, when one attack happens in a country, the operational cell in the other country might decide to speed up things just because they understand this has self-propaganda purposes, generates news, attention, all of those things. But I don't think, that there's a lot of planning that would happen from the center in Iraq and Syria. This is probably more controlled from the operatives within France.
But what message do you think ISIL is trying to send out there by carrying out the attack both in Paris and in Lebanon?
Yeah. There's actually not much thinking, required on this particular point because ISIS's statement is pretty clear, in which they said that this is in response to France's bombing in Syria, in Iraq against ISIS. So it's basically, their response to the fact that France is part of the international coalition in which they're targeting them. And some other things that they haven't mentioned, but I'm sure they feature in the thinking process, are the French forces have been very active in North Africa. They've been active in Mali, they've been active in Nigeria, in these places where ISIS affiliates are also working. So Boko Haram now has pledged its allegiance to the Islamic State. So French operatives over there or French actions over there, they collectively add to a sense of resentment against the French state, which they obviously take out by targeting French civilians.
And what kind of response then, Omar, do you anticipate from Western powers? The fear here being that will any action not make an already bad situation worse?
Yeah, look, I mean, I share that concern with you and with, I think, majority of the people who are looking at these things impartially. What the kind of reaction that we anticipate at this stage is a two-pronged reaction. One is that they will try to escalate the war in Syria and Iraq. France is probably likely to increase its bombing within Syria, just like, when the Jordanian pilot was killed and Jordan decided to also engage in more heavy bombing. And that, unfortunately, it must be said that this kind of a reaction only worsens the situation because more civilians get killed. ISIS gets it's like a silver platter being handed to them. It allows them to say, look, this is a war between the crusading Christian nation and Muslims, and more civilians who might be, not necessarily with ISIS ideologically, then can be recruited. So that's the one side of the reaction, and the other side of the reaction is, especially with the recovery of these passports, the Syrian and the Egyptian passport. I think the French authorities are going to take a more stringent view towards the refugee problem. And that is probably likely to create more resentment. And, one thing I should also say, a lot of people have been making it look like that these guys came with the refugees as if there was a there was a plan that was formed before their entry into the refugee population. Look, lots of things are happening with different refugees in different parts of Europe. I've had the opportunity to interview some of them. And, many of them have pointed out that, people can enter as refugees just because they're trying to run away. But, with internet and all these other opportunities available, they might at some point become radicalized. So one should not then hold the whole refugee population as a potential threat. The potential for radicalization can happen whether you're a refugee or not, whether you're just a French citizen or not, whether you're in Syria, Iraq or not. And the last thing I'll add to that is, just because they've targeted France right now doesn't mean that France was the primary target. Similar things can be expected to happen in the UK, in Germany, in the US. So far they haven't. Luckily they haven't, and hopefully they won't. But it can happen. So it's not like France is being singled out as such, which I think some French politicians have been trying to push that line.
Thank you so much. We have to end it there. That was Omar Shaukat from the Afro Middle East Center.